Hey guys, so in this video we're going over the retail org structure at Amazon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Benjamin Bolshinsky. I used to work at Amazon in the vendor management team, and I now run a company called Vendor Launch where we work with Amazon vendors to double their purchase orders. So without further ado, the first thing to understand as a vendor on Amazon is the way the company is structured. So at the top here, we've got Amazon.com, and this can be, Amazon.com.au.uk, whatever marketplace you're in. This is effectively split into two components. On the left, we have retail, and then on the right, we've got marketplace. So the thing to understand is when you work at Amazon, these are effectively competing models. So you can imagine kind of a brick wall in between the two. Marketplace, so this is also sometimes referred to as 3P, FBA, MFN, marketplace, they all mean the same thing. This is where, you're selling products directly to the consumer on Amazon's platform. And then on the right here, we have what's called retail. And so this is the purpose of this channel. And if you're watching this, you're probably a vendor that sells on the retail model. And so this is sometimes also called 1P, retail, vendor central. They all kind of point to the same thing, which is the retail model where you're selling products to Amazon as a company and not to the consumer directly. So if we scroll down and zoom in into the retail model, we'll get to this org chart here. So this is really important to understand because it kind of dictates when you reach out to Amazon and when you're setting up meetings as a vendor, you really should understand how the company is kind of structured. And so the first thing to understand is when you work at Amazon, everyone is assigned a number, like a level, based on their seniority in the organization. So for example, when I joined Amazon, I joined as a graduate after university, and so I was level 4. Typically, the head office or like the white collar kind of component of the business starts at around level 4. If you're working at the fulfillment centers themselves, or if you're an offshore person, then you'll probably be level 3 or below. So for the purposes of this org chart, we're going to start at kind of level 4. And so obviously as you get promoted, the salary increases from level 4, level 5, level 6 and so on. I think Jeff Bezos, don't quote me on this, 15, 16 or something like that. And then obviously within each level, you can still get kind of salary. There are salary ranges within each level. So at level 4 here in Australia would have been like anywhere between probably 60k to like 110 or so. So that there are kind of levels within the level. But for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of how it works. And so as a vendor, really you'll have two main contacts. So the first is your vendor manager, which is on the right here. And really the vendor manager is the main contact that kind of the bridge between all of the components and teams within Amazon, and then the external party. So you as a vendor. So vendor managers typically are your go-to contact for everything within Amazon. For all of these kind of separate teams, they're the ones that usually coordinate with external stakeholders. If you are a subscriber of the AVS program, Amazon Vendor Services, you will also have a brand specialist, which will actually be your day-to-day contact, even more frequently than the vendor manager. And so this is sometimes also called SVS in some marketplaces, Strategic Vendor Services, or Amazon Vendor Services. And so your brand specialist, which is what I used to do. Probably the most junior role in this diagram. And so the brand specialists typically own around 3 or 4 vendors and do the more kind of day-to-day coordinate the day-to-day activity. Your vendor manager, they kind of have a number of roles. They identify new opportunities, they sign new vendors, and they look after existing vendors within the category. You know, anywhere from like 10, maybe 20, 30 vendors, depending on the scope. And so you're probably your main contact if you don't have this AVS program. Vendor managers typically start at level 5, and then you get promoted to a senior vendor manager where you look after maybe a broader set of vendors, like a category and so on. But typically it's level 5, level 6, and then once the vendor manager gets promoted, they typically get promoted to a manager of vendor managers, which is like, I think, around 7 or so. Maybe 6 to 7, level 6 to 7. And so they usually have a number of smaller vendor managers working under them. And typically they lead like a category. So maybe you can have like, health and personal care, home, kitchen. You can have like a vendor manager leader for that category. But more often than not, they don't take as many external calls unless it's a strategic, like a massive vendor, Apple or someone like that, then, they'll probably, work with them more often. And yeah, so typically it's your vendor manager, which is your main contact. And then we go to the left here, we have what are called product managers. These are typically go from level 5 to level 7. And what product managers do is they oversee a particular product. So these very rarely do they have external calls with vendors or with external stakeholders. They usually kind of work internally. And so programs are called like direct fulfillment, subscribe and save, vendor flex, all these different kind of programs within Amazon, maybe like, baby wish list, things like that. And there's typically a program manager that oversees that program and make sure that it goes live and it works effectively. The program managers can sometimes, or they do very often, interact with vendor managers. The program manager might identify a vendor which suits a particular program, and then they'll reach out to the vendor manager to help the vendor manager kind of onboard that vendor to the program. Cool. And then as we go to the left here, sorry, just to recap. So as it says here, program managers, they partner with tech teams. So yeah, a lot of the kind of back-end tech teams to create these new features, they partner with them, launching new retail products, services, features, identifying areas of improvement. For example, here in Australia, we recently had Amazon Business launch. And so there would have been a number of product managers kind of overseeing the rollout of that program. Again, this is all, every role here is non-tech. So you have like another, whole side of the business, which is tech-based, which is actually the people that are building, the engineers and that are building these features in the background, but all of these are non-tech areas. And then, so as we go to the left here, marketing leaders. So I won't spend too much time here because they don't really hold external calls in my experience, and they oversee marketing, merchandising teams, so external marketing or marketing kind of assets on the platform itself. But typically as a vendor, you don't really interact much with them. They're not as important for your business, in my experience, as your vendor manager or as your AVS specialist or your in-stock manager, which I'll get to shortly. So that's kind of marketing over here. And so this brings me on the far left, which is called in-stock, which probably might be one of the more important areas within Amazon. And so In stock, as the name suggests, these are the teams that are responsible for the supply side, the buying side of Amazon. As you see on the top left here, you have an in-stock leader. So they lead a team of in-stock managers and set the direction for all supply chain related decisions. So this is probably level 7 onwards. And then they lead this team of in-stock managers, which typically start at 5, and then go up. And so the way it usually works is you have a separate kind of in-stock manager for each kind of area of the supply chain process of in-stock. So for example, you have someone doing like forecasting, and you have like buying, then maybe like inbound, so making sure that Amazon receives products efficiently in their warehouse. Maybe outbound, I think that might be a different team. But as you can imagine, each of the different areas, within in-stock have a separate manager: buying, forecasting, inbound, and so on. And so this is obviously quite important because they have a significant impact on the stock that is bought. Again, most of this is automated. However, there's still an impact that they have, particularly around promotions, deal events like Prime Day. The in-stock managers will coordinate that, will work in the background, kind of overseeing those events. Typically, the in-stock managers do not hold external calls. So in my experience as a vendor, most of the time they don't hold external calls. Sometimes they might hold training sessions. If you're lucky, you might be able to reach them. But generally speaking, they will liaise directly with vendor managers. So for example, they might identify significant like out of stock rates for a particular product, or some issues with the time it takes for the vendor to deliver a particular product, and so then they'll reach out to the respective vendor manager that looks after that vendor, and they'll tell them that, look, there's this vendor, you, the vendor manager, need to, liaise with them and figure out what the hell is going on. So yeah, they have quite a detailed knowledge in terms of the ordering, supply chain, out of stocks, lead times, confirmation rates. How many orders are Amazon, other vendors confirming. So they're quite important for that. But yeah, essentially, the thing to understand is like the vendor managers. This is kind of the glue that holds, I guess, all of this together. I guess like the main scope of the vendor manager, like the very thing that they're the best at, is the P&L. So managing the P&L of their category or of their vendors. That's what they do. There's also actually a finance team, which isn't pictured here. But generally, the vendor managers oversee the P&L, and then each of these teams, the in-stock managers teams, obviously have a very narrow focus in their particular domain. And they will often reach out to the vendor manager to inform them of any vendors that need to be contacted in relation to any of these issues, and then it's the vendor manager's role to then reach out to the vendor and to schedule an external call. So your vendor manager is easily your best friend. And then the other thing to note is, if you have AVS, if you subscribe to the Amazon Vendor Services Program, you have a brand specialist. The way to think of the brand specialist is effectively like an employee of the vendor manager, because obviously vendor managers look after 10, 20, 30 vendors, so they're quite limited in the scale, in the scope and detail of the vendor that they can work on. And so that's where the brand specialist comes in, who typically looks after under 5 or 6 vendors max, and they have a more detailed kind of look into the vendor's business. The brand specialists, they also interact very often and frequently with each of these different programs, category, the marketing managers, in-stock managers, and so on, program managers. So yeah, these are the two main kind of external contacts. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to schedule a call. Let me know. And have a great day. Bye.